Welcome to an evening of Baroque music, and I'm very glad and happy that you decided to attend our concert, because one of the things that a lot of people do not know about is Baroque music. I'm going to give you a little bit of background information so that you can really truly appreciate what the music was like during the Baroque era, which is very, very different than music that we play today. First of all, the Baroque era was between more or less 1600 and 1750. And the Baroque era ended with the death of Bach. And this particular kind of music, the orchestras were different, the music was very different than what we see today. In a symphony, for example, and I'm sure you've seen enough on TV, a symphony has a lot of instruments. Whereas the Baroque orchestra was a smaller orchestra, it was a chamber orchestra. The Equinox Chamber Orchestra is based on a Baroque orchestra. If you notice, there are not that many players. So a chamber orchestra is, again, a small ensemble. The Baroque orchestra had violins, violas, cellos, double bass, but there was also an additional thing that a Baroque orchestra had that is not present in orchestras today. That is called the basso continuo, and it's shortened to continuo, which is a group of instruments that provided the chordal structure of the pieces that the composers wrote. The continuo consists of cellos and the double bass, or the contrabass is another name for it. Could be guitar, could be harpsichord, could be lute, could be harp. These instruments were not really dictated, so to speak, by the composer. The composer wrote the piece and then gave it to the performers and said, here, you do something with it. So instrumentation was not really all that specified. So another thing that you need to know before you can really appreciate what goes on in a Baroque orchestra is a concept called terraced dynamics, as in a terrace. And the music that they played in those days was either loud or soft, with the various gradations in between. What I mean by that is the music was based on the harpsichord, more or less. Harpsichord had two loudnesses. It was either loud or it was soft. That is what a dynamic is. The dynamics are the loudness and the softness that you find in music. Because the harpsichord could only play loud or soft, or as those of you who have studied piano, you know that you can gradually get something very loud and then gradually get something very soft. That does not occur with a harpsichord. So a lot of composers wrote pieces of music with the idea that the performers are going to do what we call terraced dynamics. Now, again, the composers didn't write this stuff in. They wrote the music, here it is, and it was up to the performers to decide how they were going to perform it. Now, terraced dynamics can be in a couple of different ways. As the piece that you heard, it was loud, and then you heard it go soft, and then it went loud again, and then it went soft. So the people who were playing the instruments could play loud, or they could play soft. Another way that composers and performers got the terraced dynamics was to have the whole orchestra play, which is called ripieno, and then the concertino group, which is a smaller group of soloists that also play. So you have the whole orchestra, which is loud, and then you have the smaller group of soloists, which then is a softer sound. Within that group of soloists, you also had the core soloists. So composers and performers really enjoyed messing around, so to speak, with the different dynamics in the music. One other thing that you need to know about Baroque music is that there was no conductor. There was no person who walks out and conducts the orchestra. It just didn't exist at that time. Now, there were conductors. The first violinist, or the principal violinist, would wave his bow to get everybody started, and everybody played. And there were also the harpsichord player, sometimes would conduct, waving one arm and playing with the other. There were also little sticks that they used, rolled up paper, and one of the things that they also used was a rather large staff. It was very ornate, and the conductor would bang it on the floor. Well, They were not that sophisticated in those days, and one of the problems was that a composer called Jean-Baptiste Lully, a French composer, very well-known French composer, was conducting the orchestra by banging on the floor, and what happened is he banged his foot. And he created such a bad injury that gangrene set in, and he died. So people decided, well, maybe that's not a really good way to conduct an orchestra. So again, there were really no hard and fast rules in Baroque music. So the piece that we are going to perform for you now is called the Bourrée. And that was written by Handel, very, very well-respected composer. He was originally from Germany, emigrated to England, and so now he's known as an English composer, even though he was German in origin. And I'm sure you've all heard Handel's Water music, you've certainly heard the Messiah, so he's a very, very well-respected composer. The piece that we're going to play is a Bourrée, which is very, very popular with composers during the Baroque era. They love to take dances that everybody knew what a Bourrée was. Everybody knew what sarabande was, everybody knew what a gavotte was, everybody knew all these types of dances. But what the composer would do would be to stylize it. In other words, the Bourrée that you're going to hear performed by this orchestra is not something that people would want to dance to. In fact, it would not be very easy to dance to. However, the composers follow the form. So what I would like you to listen for, the terrace dynamics, listen for the ripieno versus the concertino, back to ripieno, and that way I think that you'll enjoy listening to this music just a little bit more, since now you're on the inside track. Now we're going to perform another piece by Handel. This is a hornpipe. A hornpipe was a dance that was developed on the British sailing ships from England. And the sailors would play a little pipe type of instrument, and they'd be doing their little dance. And it became very popular with composers in England. Now, the rest of Europe did not find the hornpipe that enticing, so that they really didn't. Maybe a few composers in Germany wrote hornpipes, but that really was not a popular piece for anyone outside of England. So this hornpipe is a part of Handel's water music, And it, again, this is not a piece that you could really kind of dance to, but it is a stylized version. The piece begins with a soloist, then it goes into concertino, ripieno. So again, listen for the differences in the dynamics.
I think
next piece is the pavane, and this has a bit of a convoluted history as far as this little piece. A pavane, first of all, is a type of very slow, stately dance that was very popular in Italy. And then it fell out of favor, but like all dances, and it was replaced by something else. But composers really loved the pavane. There was an anonymous composer during the Renaissance that wrote this piece called Region Pavane. Okay, and pavane, and we're not sure who wrote it. We're not sure when he wrote it, or she. The situation with this early kind of music is we're not very good records kept. So, I mean, some of the composers, when a composer was born, they would say circa, because they really weren't sure when he was born. So the pavane was a very nice little piece, and a French composer during the Renaissance by the name of Jacques Play, he heard the pavane and he really liked the piece. The pavane had only 3 parts. He decided he was going to add a 4th part, and he was going to turn it into what we call a chanson. A chanson is a song. He wanted people to sing it. Now, if I may digress for 1 second, music at this time was not copyrighted. And in fact, if a composer heard something that another composer did, and he really liked that piece, the composer who originally wrote it felt very honored that that composer would take the piece and write something additional to it. In other words, would mess with the music. And so it went. So composers were, there was no plagiarism. Composers were not very upset. So when Josquin, when he heard the piece, he changed it around. Another composer by the name of Susado heard that piece, and he said, "Oh, I like this piece. I'm going to change it even more." So he wrote a version. Well, what I'm doing, which is very typical in the Baroque era, I'm taking the piece and I'm writing it for a Baroque orchestra. Now, the piece was originally written for only 3 voices, and now it's made its way to our century and to a Baroque orchestra. So the piece is, I have a translation. It's a very, very sad piece. And the words, it's called Mille Regrets, and it is a very, very, they could really write pieces of music in those days as far as the lyrics. And Mille Regrets means 1,000 regrets, and I'm going to write you the translation. Read the translation that was written in French. 1,000 regrets at deserting you and leaving behind your loving face. I feel so much sadness and such painful distress that it seems to me my days will soon dwindle away. They could write some poetry in those days. So this piece is very, very sad, and I hope if we have Kleenex, if anybody wants to cry a little bit, that is fine with me. And the gavotte is a dance, That, again, very popular. Now, I need to tell you a little bit about the composer who wrote the song. And I'm laughing because his name was Rameau, and he was a brilliant composer. He wrote tones of music for the harpsichord, brilliant harpsichordist. He wrote theory, music theory, because at that time they were still developing a lot of what we take for granted today. So he was highly respected, but he was not well liked. Rameau was a rather cranky individual. He was irritable, secretive. He was hot-headed, argumentative, and basically no one liked him. And he was kind of like the Beethoven of his day, because no one liked Beethoven either, especially the musicians that worked for him. So Rameau wrote beautiful music, and the question has always been, how can such a sour individual write such beautiful music? So the question is, how can it? The piece we're going to perform for you is the Gavotte. Now, this is full orchestra, so it is ripieno. Everyone is going to be playing. There's no soloist, there's no concertino. Everyone is playing the piece. So the way we're going to get terrace dynamics is to play loud and soft, and then loud, and then soft, and loud and soft and loud. And so that's what gives the piece its interest. A solo by our concert master, Dan Simon, and he is going to perform a Handel piece, which is a sonata. Now, sonata, by today's standards, or the way it usually is a solo instrument with some kind of an accompaniment, usually a piano. In the Baroque era, the sonata was not yet that well established. It was starting to take roots. Sometimes it would be a continual group. It was not really certain. Sometimes they didn't even know what instrument. There was one piece that was written for oboe or violin. So you didn't have an oboe, well, you could play the violin. Well, toward the end of the Baroque, this form started showing up, and it became very, very well established in the classical era. And tonight, Dan is going to perform a beautiful sonata, again written by Handel, and he is going to be accompanied by Ella, our harpsichordist. harpsichordist. And then a harpsichordist in Lakeside. The mind boggles. Now we're coming to the part in our performance where that is based on the music of Bach. And we say the best for the last. Bach was a titan. He was a giant. He was the most important composer, not only during the Baroque era, but he is considered to be, some historians will argue, yes or no, but he's considered to be the father of music. What Bach ended up doing was, before his time, during the medieval ages and the Renaissance, they were developing forms of music that became the staple by the time the Baroque era came around. But what Bach did was he took these forms and pushed them to the max. So the Baroque era, the Baroque music that we're playing for you, all of that culminated in Bach. And he is a very, very important composer for several reasons. The first being that he was an incredible improviser. And not only was he an incredible improviser, he was also, his virtuosity was completely unmatched in Europe. He was considered to be the king of improvisation. And what historians think that if Bach were alive today, he would be a jazz musician, because he would very much relate to what jazz musicians do. What do? They improvise. And in Bach's time, improvisation was a biggie, especially if you played the organ, the harpsichord, any keyboard instrument. If you were a harpsichordist, for example, in a Baroque ensemble, the music was not written out for you. You were given, as in jazz, you have a lead sheet with chords and melody. In the Baroque era, you were given the bass line, some numbers, and you had to make sense out of it all. That was a harpsichordist's job, or an organist. Well, Bach reigned supreme in this ability. The other thing that was very important about Bach is that he, in music that we have today, we have what's called equal temperament. And that means if you ever studied music, you played an instrument, remember your scales, okay, those, we can trace all that back really to Bach's time, because until that time, nobody could really play the same piece of music depending on what your instrument was. Everybody had to kind of tune their instruments constantly. That was, some of it was called mean temperament, others they were playing in mode, so there was no one standard. What Bach did was he did not develop what's called well temperament, but he developed the wherewithal that people, musicians especially, obviously, could start playing the same pieces of music together and also play them in the identical keys. That was called well temperament, and he wrote the well-tempered clavier, which, again, if you studied any kind of keyboard instrument and you reached a point where you could actually play Bach, that is probably what your teacher gave you to study. And the well-tempered clavier is 2 volumes, and what Bach does is he takes music and he writes it in all the different keys, and he says, see, you can do this. Well, that still was not sufficient, and eventually it led to what we use today, equal temperament. The thing about Bach's music is that he reigned supreme. There was no one that really could compare to Bach, but during Bach's time, he was not really considered to be that good of a, or that important of a composer. Yes, he was important, but he did not get the respect that we give him today, because we're absolutely fascinated by what Bach was able to do. The piece that we're going to play for you now is the Minuet. Started in France. Minuet means they took very tiny little steps, and I'm sure if you've watched any kind of a movie, you've seen people do the minuet. Again, the minuet was danced as well as stylized, so the piece you're going to hear is not something that you could really dance to. also a Bach piece, and it is called The Air. Now, you may not recognize the title, but you'll definitely recognize the tune, because it has been in commercials, movies, and I'm sure once you hear it, you go, oh, I know this piece, I love it. Everybody loves this piece. It is I would say, the most beautiful piece of music that was ever written. The piece is not only beautiful, it has a lot of longing to it. It has a lot of desire written in it. Bach was a very religious man, and it is my belief that when Bach wrote this piece, he really wanted to see the face of God. And this piece is himself crying out to that desire. The piece is very song-like. And as a result, many conductors do not use a baton to conduct this piece. It's too stilting using a baton. A lot of conductors, including myself, use choral conducting, even though it is an instrumental piece. Bach originally wrote this for strings and continuo meaning obviously our little group over here, but the specified instrument is the harpsichord. So I will like you to sit back and enjoy probably, again, the most beautiful piece of music ever written. We are going to be performing the Brandenburg Concerto No. 5. Now, this is a very strange piece of music. First of all, there were 6 Brandenburg concertos that Bach wrote for one of his patrons in Brandenburg. And there are a series of what we call concerto grosso. And the concerto grosso is a type of piece, it's rather structured, and again, it featured the piano, and it featured the concertino and soloists and all of that. The thing about the 5th Brandenburg Concerto is that Bach did a very odd thing, and historians are still trying to figure out why he did this. He wrote out the harpsichord part. Now, composers in those days, as I had mentioned, did not write out the harpsichord part. You had the bass line, the numbers, and you're on your own. Okay? Bach wrote everything out. And the feeling is that he had just returned from Berlin with a state-of-the-art harpsichord. We want to show it off a little bit. Okay, that's one idea. Another idea was that there was a composer by the name of Louis Marchand, who was a relatively well-known composer from France, and they were going to have a kind of dueling harpsichords during the Brandenburg Concerto No. 5. Now, one of the things that I'm sure those of you who listen to jazz know what a cutting contest is. It's where a jazz player plays something, he does it on saxophone, and then the trumpet player imitates what he did, and he builds on it, and then back and forth until there's a victor, so to speak. Well, historians think that Bach wrote this out because they wanted to have a basis from which to work on, or work from, and both Bach and Louis Marchand were going to have, again, to see who would win the contest. Well, it didn't come to pass because Marchand said, no, I don't think so, and he fled back to France, leaving Bach to just do it himself, because, again, nobody goes up against the king. And the king of virtuosity and improvisation was Bach. So we are performing the Brandenburg Concerto No. 5, the first movement. One other thing that if you go on the internet and you hear this, one very curious thing that we do today is that we play these pieces way too fast. If you've ever read Future Shock by Alvin Toffler, and I believe that book came out in the 70s, one of the things that he wrote in that book was that we play Baroque music and all this other music way too fast. Well, what do we have? What we have people landing on, we have astronauts landing on the moon, okay? We have the shuttle. We're used to an accelerated lifestyle. What did they have? What was the fastest thing in the Baroque era? The horse. That was it, folks. They didn't even have trains in those days. So life was much slower, and Toffler suggests that music was much slower, was played much slower. So we're slowing down the pace a little bit of the Brandenburg because my contention as a conductor and also as a musician, if the piece is too fast, it's like a train going by, and you don't get to see the faces in the windows, okay? But if the bus goes by, or the trolley, you get to see who's riding the trolley. So that is number one about the Brandenburg Concerto No. 5. Another thing about this is that everything that you've learned tonight about Baroque music is going to culminate in this piece. And there's also one more thing called the ritornello. The ritornello is Bach's state. Think of it as a set of bookends. You hear the beginning of the Brandenburg, and I'm sure a lot of you have heard it. Then Bach messes around with it, and he changes it, and composers, they're very restless people. They don't just play the same thing over and over again. So you're going to hear how Bach develops it. Then the entire section that began the Brandenburg is going to come back. So this is Brandenburg Concerto, the first movement, No. 5, and it is abridged. I have also Karen, who's going to play the violin solo. attending our concert, and thank you again for such a nice applause. These musicians have worked very, very hard for several months to be able to bring this music to you. I'm glad that you were here this evening to enjoy the concert, and one more hand for... Thank you, and enjoy your evening, and drive carefully.